Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobhit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intentional Product Manager podcast. I'm Shobhit Chugh, and today I have a very special guest on the podcast, BJ Hillabush. So BJ and I work together at Intentional Product Manager, and we both coach product managers to land top roles. Now, prior to this, BJ was Senior Director of Product at Logos, and in the past, he's had a storied product management career, before which he was the Executive Director at a nonprofit. So we might also talk about that, but for now, BJ, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
BJ, let's jump right in. Tell me, what's one of the biggest mistakes product managers make early in their job search?
Oh man, I see it so often. I would say the biggest mistake is not having clear positioning. So in this market where there's so much competition, there are hundreds of people applying for the same roles, you can't just go in without any unique angle. And so many people apply and they might have generalist product experience, and then they run into this trap of what we call, you and I, silver medal syndrome, where they get to the end and they say, I'm sorry, we went with somebody who had more direct experience. And so if you're not aligning your narrative and have a unique angle of mastery to the roles you're targeting, you're never going to get picked and there's not going to be any conversion. And so this is why we see in the market so many subsets of the product management title: growth PMs, data PMs, platform PMs. Everybody is trying to niche down to have a differentiator.
Tell me a bit more. When you say unique angle of mastery, what might that look like?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different approaches you can take, but it could be domain specific. So, saying I am an expert or a leader in fintech. It could be technology specific, AI PM, or data, whatever the background is. But you have to have something that causes you to stand out. So so often when people are applying, so much of what the hiring managers are seeing are hundreds of resumes that look identical. What's the one thing that's going to make you stand out? And sometimes it even could be a personal component or unique accomplishment, something that you've done, but it has to be something that clearly sets you apart. And I think without that, you're going to really struggle in the market.
For those watching on video will know that my positioning is a product management with the best tuxedo cat ever. For those on audio, you just have to imagine. Okay, so then let's talk about one more thing that I hear about nonstop, the resume. Some people obsess over their resume. Where do you see that potentially going wrong?
Yeah, I think there's a couple risks here. The first one being, I think a lot of times people make a common mistake and they spend a lot of time tweaking words, changing little things about it, trying to have, should I use spearheading or leading, right? Some of those things. But a lot of it really comes down to demonstrating clear impact. You have to focus on the outcomes and metrics. And some specific examples are, I see a lot of bullets like, led cross-functional teams or owned roadmap for X. That's table stakes for the role. All you're describing is that you are a product manager, but what actually happened? What's the results? Give me the numbers. Tell me what changed. What were the trade-offs associated with that? I think a lot of times people use buzzwords instead of showing real product thinking. So, you see resumes, or I see this a lot of titles, and particularly on LinkedIn. Synergized cross-functional innovation. What does that mean? And everybody goes to ChatGPT and it spits out the same stuff. But what were the real trade-offs or the problems that you were involved in? And people need to show that. And I think the last thing is, we hear a lot of feedback, particularly if you go on LinkedIn right now. Everybody's going to tell you to customize your resume for every position. The biggest challenge with this, though, is I think there are lots of different approaches, right? But if you are not aligning the role with what you're targeting, you will run into challenges. Because if I have, say you're applying to a fintech role and there's two people. One person is, I've done a little bit of everything. And the one person, their resume says, I eat, sleep, drink, fintech. This is all I do. There's a clear angle there. But I think so many people get caught up in this idea of I'm going to customize my resume for every position. I think there's other strategies, but at the very least, your resume has to have some indication to me as a hiring manager that you can do the job that I want you to do and you can help solve the problems that I have.
Let me ask you. So you were hiring manager, senior director of product, you built teams. How much time did you spend looking at a resume?
A minute. Honestly, though, you make your first judgment in an instant. And unless there's something that clearly jumps out, you don't have time to look at it more. And I think a lot of times people also miss the LinkedIn. There's not a single person who I was having an interview with, I didn't also look at their LinkedIn. I looked at their resume, sure, but I also checked on their LinkedIn.
And it seems like you're bringing back the first point you mentioned about angle of mastery back into the resume. If it's not obvious right away what your angle of mastery is, it's just never going to make the cut. Let's talk about spray and pray. Apply to a bunch of roles. Hopefully, you apply to 100, you'll get a certain number of next rounds. Why doesn't that work?
I'm going to say probably something controversial here, but here's the actual metrics, right? If you apply, the conversion rate from an online application to an interview is only about 2 to 3% without a referral. 2 to 3%. So you could play the numbers game and there are results, right? I mean, in the same way you build any funnel, if that's what you want to do, you can apply to thousands of roles and eventually get some conversions. Here's the problem, though. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time changing the offer, so changing their resume to fit all of these instead of fixing the actual funnel. And this is the part, I think this is a different approach. But if I just, typically what people do, I see a role on LinkedIn, I go, that looks okay. I take a bunch of time to change my resume to kind of match that. I run it through ChatGPT to see if it kind of works, and then I ship it. Well, now I'm building a funnel of all these opportunities that loosely match. By the time I actually hear back from the company, I don't even know which version of my resume I sent them. When we actually have a conversation, right, my narrative has all fallen apart. Or here's the alternative. I can fix the funnel. I can build a real strategy of roles that I actually want to say yes to if I got an offer, of ones where I clearly have an angle of mastery, where I would stand out and I would be one of the best candidates, and I can only build a funnel of opportunities that you would say yes to. And if we think about it like a sales funnel, right? If I have a bunch of people coming through wanting to buy my product, but they're not the right target audience, they're not my ideal customer profile, then I have to change and customize my offer in order to get them to buy what I'm doing. And that's what we're doing with customizing resumes every time. Instead, I would say, get the right customer in your funnel. Get the right company, and you do that by building a real strategy and taking time to think about, what do I actually want? And I know it's scary in this market to think like that, but you'll actually increase your conversion rate if we really think about, where do I want to be? Where am I a good fit?
It's a fallacy, right? Like, because what I observe, and I'm sure you do, is the market gets worse and people go, hey, at this point, I can be picky. I'll take anything. And that is actually their undoing.
And it almost always leads to burnout. You might get more interviews through volume, but they're the wrong ones. And it's exhausting going through and getting more rejections. The natural challenge with applying to more is more rejections. And so much of being successful in the job search is a mindset game, more than anything, because we don't stop just job searching. We keep going, but the hardest part of doing it every day, if volume is your strategy, is how do I keep overcoming the rejections of hundreds of things and still wake up every day and say, I'm going to go apply to 100 more. That's hard.
One of the things I've observed is that there's certain set of people who come join the program, and in a few months, they're done. And they're not always the people who I would have looked at and said, oh, this person will be done in a couple of months. They just took the strategy and they believed in it, and so they got the results. Others are still hedging, so it's not really a strategy. Your burnout point is right on. It's such a big problem in job search,
especially in this market.
Let's talk about another problem, and let's talk about interviews. People love to talk about interviews. What are some of the common problems or common traps maybe product managers might fall into during interview preparation?
I am shocked to see this, but I mean, you and I, we talk to hundreds of product managers a week, and I am still shocked to see this. People targeting their dream roles, targeting FANG roles, targeting companies that are super competitive, and they wing it. They wing it in this market. I'm like, you're targeting an L6, an L7 and beyond. You're going after one of the most competitive companies on the planet. There's a limited number of these opportunities and a cooldown period if you get rejected, and you're going to wing it. And it blows my mind that people would do this, right? Like, I don't understand why you would go to all the work to get the interview in the first place, which is hard in this market, and then go in unprepared. And I think a lot of this comes down to this odd sense of overconfidence. I mean, I speak with product managers every day, and I'll ask them, hey, how are you feeling about product design interviews? How are you feeling about behavioral interviews? And they'll say 9 out of 10. And I'm like, what are you basing that off of? They're like, well, I usually do pretty good. But when we actually look at the data, and it's hard to do this internally, we're all product managers, but it's hard to just honestly look at the data. Those same people have been interviewing for 6 months and nothing's converted. Yet they're still saying 9 out of 10. And this would go into, I think the biggest risk is not getting feedback. And I think in the old days, if we go back a couple years when the market was great, you could throw out resumes. You could get a bunch of interviews for companies you weren't super thrilled about, and you could get a bunch of practice and feedback. In this market, you won't. You won't get any feedback. And if you don't take the time to meet with other people who can provide skilled feedback at the level that you want, then you're not going to move and grow. And this is the same for our products.
Can I go back to a point you just mentioned? So, somebody who has been interviewing for 6 months is not passing these interviews, but is still rating them 9 out of 10. What internal dialogue leads to that?
I think it might be a coping mechanism. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of rejection is really hard. It's hard. And I think, we don't talk about this because we're all tech people, but we push hard, and product managers just naturally attract people that are, achievers and but I think a lot of times we hedge that to protect ourselves. It's not me, it's the market. The market's too bad. The role wasn't the right fit. They went with somebody who was more direct experience. It wasn't actually a performance issue. And the market will tend to provide that false narrative. So like if you get any feedback, which is rare, the feedback will be, oh, you were great, but we went with somebody who is more qualified. And companies are incentivized to provide this feedback. One, because of all the laws, they can't really give you feedback without any risk. And the second thing is that's an easier thing to say, right? Like when we break up, we say, let's be friends. We're not actually going to be friends. That's an easier way to break up with you. But in the same way, it's easier to say, it wasn't you, we went with another candidate. But the reality is you have to take ownership for it. It was you. Something about your narrative did not convince them. And that's a harsh reality, but I think we all need to accept it.
That's a really good point on people not owning the actual problem. And it's because it's painful, really painful to admit that you've been trying for 6 months and you're not good at these interviews and you don't have currently a plan of getting good at these interviews.
I say that, right? I'm throwing these things out as direct comments, but not without empathy. I fully understand how hard it is. The frustration that I have that you're sensing is you're actually only harming yourself. Even though it's hard, right? You're only harming yourself if you hold on to that. And I think, another key element is in the behavioral interviews in particular, right? What you're going to get, 75% of the market is behavioral questions. So you will get them. I think a lot of people miss the drama. We all know the STAR framework. Everybody's heard it. You're going to share those things. If you're taking your job search seriously, you're going to try to communicate your stories. But, you run into 2 traps. You're either, talking too long and getting stuck in the weeds, or you've lost everything that makes the story interesting. And at the end of the day, I mean, I love this quote. I don't know who to attribute it to, but that a business is just a social club with customers. And your interview functions the same way, right? Like you're not just communicating data, You're trying to get people invited into the story. And if there's no drama in your story, I did this, I did customer research, I delivered this feature, it had X outcome. You're no different than anybody else. What were the trade-offs? What were the challenges that you had to overcome? What about that time that VP, wanted to go a different direction and, was almost forcing you to do so, and you had to really stick your neck out. Those are the things that we all know exist as a PM, but sometimes we don't share them.
Back to like both these points, one about rejection and like winging it. I mean, I've done it back in the day. I was at Google, Facebook came in, they were like, cool, we want to interview you. We do these metrics questions. I'm like, I know metrics. Cool, let's go for it. And like in 15 minutes, it was obvious that, hey, we can end the interview now. There's no way I'm getting it. I've missed like some of the most obvious things because I just decided to wing it because at that point I was in that for whatever reason. But like when you really want that role, winging it is not a good one. And then to your other point on like rejection just being hard and like owning up to that, it's just hard. It's psychologically hard. And like if you're already in the pain of I'm not getting the job, you want to add additional pain, and that's ultimately harming you. So what about application, referrals, networking? What do people get wrong there?
The issue here is a couple. So I think the first one is people wait to network until after they apply. And I'm totally guilty of this. Right when you're in a demanding product role, you're not thinking about how am I continuing to build relationships and grow your network. I would say most PMs were guilty of this because the role is so taxing and demanding and you're doing so much internal networking. But I would say looking back on my career, that was a mistake and one that I can own and one that I need to continue to grow and change. And so my first feedback would be whether you're in a job search or not, start your networking now. And I think when we use the term networking, it kind of mystifies it. And what does that mean? It's just relationships with people. So simply taking the time, even on LinkedIn, which LinkedIn now automates and helps you, it'll tell you every time somebody got a promotion or a birthday or whatever, to even taking the time to just send a quick message or to check in with old contacts, ask how they're doing. When there's no ask involved, it's really easy to network. But you don't need anything, so it's really easy to just say, hey, it's been a while since we've caught up. Would love to hear what's going on. Can we do a 15-minute coffee chat? And there's no ask. Just simply, hey, want to continue to stay connected and build a relationship. I think the second one is you make the cold ask without any context. So reaching out to some random person and then saying, hey, can you refer me? In this market, I guarantee you, and I get this all the time. I'm sure I can't even imagine what your DMs look like in this regard. You have a way bigger network than I do, but I personally get 10 of these, probably a month. Random people that I barely remember that we got connected a long time ago. Hey, can you refer me for this? And I'm like, I'm racking my brain trying to remember where we work together, who you are in that context, and most of the time, I'm open to referring people. I'm generally somebody that's absolutely willing to help in this market. But even I want some sort of give me some context, help me understand, give me some sort of relational motivation to help you. And I would be naturally inclined to do so if you give me some additional context. So those are two that probably pop out. I have some other thoughts, but what do you think about that?
The cold ask is a problem, and it's also, in my mind, like a very significant cold ask in the sense of, hey, okay, so go find this job, write something about me, like a lot. Now, if the ask was maybe simpler, like, hey, I've already applied, please, can you forward this to this? Here's why I'm an excellent fit. Might not be that bad. Might not really be that bad. What else do people get wrong about networking?
Yeah, I think a big one, and this is something that, we've seen, is a lot of times people will be getting referrals from people at the same level and from people in, other parts of the organization. So we all, from a ratio perspective, we all know 10 engineers for every product manager that we know. But as we've seen, product leaders are converting at a much higher rate in terms of referral. And this requires some intentional networking, but if you're doing a bunch of referrals and you're not seeing conversion, the first question I would ask is, Who are you asking for those referrals? Are these salespeople? Are these engineering? Are they marketing? Or are they product leaders? And that makes a difference. And the level makes a difference, right? If you can get to product leaders as opposed to an entry-level PM, then you have a better chance of converting. And then I would say missing the chance to build relationship and kind of warm up people proactively. So there may be companies that you're interested in. If you have an intentional strategy, ideally, you've mapped out some companies you're interested in before you aggressively start applying for roles or before roles even pop up. Take the time to reach out, build some of those relationships before the ask comes up, and connect with them. And connect with people on a human level first, as much as you can.
Love all those things around networking, and it's a very misunderstood topic. Let's talk about a scary topic: compensation and negotiations. I think it terrifies most of the people that I speak to. What do product managers need to remember when they go through that phase?
I think a big mistake here is not knowing your value. And it's not just your personal value, it's your value in the market, in the specific company, in the specific location, because it's different. And I think, we kind of know this, but I don't think people realize how big of a difference it is, right? So I know what my value is in the Midwest in a remote role. I know what my value is in the Bay Area, and they're very different. I also know what my value is in a FANG company, and I know what my value would be in a small startup, and they are radically different. And that's not a judgment on me, right? That's just a reality of what my value is to that type of company. But I think a lot of people come in with a blanket strategy, particularly if you've only been in one of these industries and you're trying to make a shift. So sometimes I see FANG people, right, making their 500K salary and they go, yeah, I want to jump to a startup. And we have to have an honest conversation where I'm like, okay, are you ready to take a 50% pay cut? And there's levels you can change, right? You can move up and go take a head of product role, but are you willing to make that sacrifice and that change? And there could be very good reasons to do that. I'm not saying, but that's not a judgment on your value. That's just what you're worth to that type of company and what they're able to pay. And I see the same in the inverse. Somebody who's making 150K in a senior PM role in a small company, jumping to a FANG role, they go, oh, well, I'd be really excited to, get 175K. And now they've undersold themselves and they'll never land the role. So I think, one, you have to know the market. And there's obviously lots of tools. Levels.fyi helps with this, but it's broader than that. I think it's really understanding Levels.fyi is largely agnostic of location and some of these other dynamics. So I think you got to do a little bit deeper search to understand some of those things. I think another big concern I see is because of fear in this market, people are underselling themselves. They're like, negotiation's dead. I just have to take whatever I can get. And that bums me out, to be honest, because you're still, if you've gotten to the point where you're getting offers, they want you. You are still an asset and you have the ability to negotiate. And I think people don't realize that. They just take whatever they can get and are missing out on that. Also, nobody likes to negotiate. I mean, some of us do. They're rare, right? But most people feel uncomfortable. And it feels like, I'd be making this big risk, or it feels uncomfortable to ask for more. I'm just going to take it and not risk it. But how many times, you've done thousands of negotiations at this point. How many times have you ever had anybody get rejected because of a number? So 2 out of thousands, everybody should listen to it. 2 out of thousands of negotiations were turned down because too aggressive.
I mean, not even aggressive. Those companies were just like, no, we don't negotiate. How dare you negotiate? Both those people in less than a month had a new offer. Both of them at a higher compensation, one at almost double what this company was initially offering. So it's a lot. You use this phrase, and I want to talk about it because it could be a triggering phrase for people, your value. Tell me more about the supply and demand and context aspect of this piece.
Yeah, I think obviously there's tons of supply in this market. You're going to go up against hundreds of other people. By the time you've gotten to the point where they have chosen you and given you an offer, you now have value to them. The company has decided that out of 500 or 1,000 people, you're the person that they want to pick. This is your opportunity. Now you now have cards to play because they do want you. And nobody wants to go back through that process of filtering out 500 applicants to get down to this stage. It's expensive. It's time consuming. So you do have some cards even in this market. And so there is some value there. I think the other thing I see people do is out of fear, they pre-anchor. And there are some cases where I think it's good to pre-anchor. In most cases, I would say I would not recommend that. But a lot of people will go in and they'll just lowball right out of the gate because they're so desperate for a role. Oh yeah, I only want this. It's fine. Whatever you can give me. The recruiter will ask because that's what they get paid to do, and maybe they can get you for cheap. They'll say, all right, what kind of salary expectations do you have in the very first screening interview? And I see a lot of people anchor and lowball themselves really soon.
That last point, very critical. Like, thing I've observed as well, just like you, is that whatever they are like, at a minimum, I must make 175. So they're like, cool, at a minimum, 175. The recruiter hears, cool, 175 it is. We can make that happen. Awesome. I just saved the company $100,000 because we could have offered a lot more. But back to the supply and demand and the value piece, maybe like expanding on a couple of things. One, like just I'm concerned sometimes people might trigger it as, oh, like my inherent value as a person, as a professional and whatnot. It's sort of like, no, if you work for a larger company, you get more in cash. If you work for a smaller company, you get more in stock options. And that's just what the market supports for your level of experience and how you position yourself, and like very dispassionately said. But your other point around you've been through this process and now you have a strong negotiation piece. I want to add a product management framework to it. So like when somebody's making a decision to use a product, there's of course, the product's going to cost something, but there's two other factors that are often much bigger in people's mind: effort and risk. If it's risky to use it, they won't. If it's risk-free, they're likely to just move forward. Same thing with effort. It takes a lot of effort. Like even if it's cheap, I might not use it. Those are in your favor. You said, I'm a great fit. They agree. It's risky for them to go out in the market and it's a lot of effort. Back to your earlier point, like as a hiring manager, BJ, it's like how much time did you want to spend looking at resumes?
Exactly zero. Less than zero.
Exactly. So great points around negotiation and knowing your value. Let's end on this last point. Like, so, a lot of people say, I don't know what I want. I'm just waiting. Any thoughts on that?
Again, I'm probably going to offer some harsh truth here. It's procrastination. For the exact reasons that you just shared. It's easier to wait it out and suffer in your current situation. It just is. Nobody likes the job search process. There were tons of times where I was frustrated. I was complaining to my wife about my product management role. I knew, right? But until that pain becomes so much that now I want to search, it's easier to procrastinate. It's easier to just continue to whine to my wife than it is to actually do the work. Right. And that's unfortunate and that's human nature, but that's the reality. And so I think that's the challenge here. And one of the best ways to overcome that, not to just end on a sad note, is I want to work out. I want to, be more healthy. The same strategy I would take to be effective there works here. I go and I get a personal trainer and I have somebody hold me accountable. Or I reach out to a friend and I say, let's go to the gym together. Right? Like get accountability and support in it. Set some goals and have somebody hold you accountable to them. I'm going to regularly apply. I'm going to do mock interviews. Get a cohort of people to do it with you. Get a coach, like intentional product manager, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, there's ownership and the ownership falls on us. And if you're casually applying to one random role you see on LinkedIn once a week, your job search will take you 2 years in this market.
I agree with you. A year ago, I spent $10,000 on a health program. I am 36 pounds lighter now. And before that, a year before, when I didn't spend anything, I had all the reasons why it's impossible for me to lose weight. My genes, my liver, something ratio is this, which holds the weight constant, all procrastination reasons.
Which is rough, right? Like it's hard to take that kind of ownership. But at the end of the day, it's on us and you can change it. And that's the beauty of taking ownership is if it is up to us, you can change it. if it's all the market and it's too hard and I'll never get a role, right? All the excuses we hear in every LinkedIn post, the market's too saturated. There's too many offers, right? There are too many people applying. If it's all the market's fault and you have zero ownership, you can't change it. Yet every day you and I see product managers landing their dream roles because they took ownership of it, stopped making excuses, and started doing the work. And that's a harsh truth. And I say it with empathy, but it's one that we all need, right? I could sit around and complain about being overweight or not doing the work, but at the end of the day, if I want to be healthy, I have to actually do the work. And it's okay to get help. It's okay to get a coach. It's okay to get a personal trainer, right? I'm not saying you have to do it alone. Do it with a friend, but you have to take ownership to start.
In our internal community, we have this internal forum on a platform called Circle. One of her amazing clients, she posted, she's like, hey, I realized I was getting drawn into the tariffs are going on. This is happening. Market's going to shit. So this is what I did. I started to do this practice and I turned off all news. And one of our other coaches brought up the point of, hey, you're internalizing action rather than externalizing. That's really valuable. You take that ownership of taking action rather than be like, oh, market's bad. This is happening in the news. They did this analysis of when some of the top startups were founded. Most of them were founded in recessions and worst times to raise funds and everything. So it just doesn't work. BJ, that was absolutely fantastic. Those job search mistakes are so common, avoidable, yet they remain hidden. Any final thoughts?
The job search is, if you listen to all the news, if you listen to every post from every influencer, product management is dead, the market's crap, there's no opportunities, everything's overwhelmed, right? It feels chaotic and random. It doesn't have to be. It really doesn't. It doesn't have to be. And I think we try to complicate it, but with the right mindset, with the right tools, with the right accountability, you can do this. And it's a skill set. And just like when you jump into a first product management role and it feels overwhelming until you get your feet under you, but you have the skills that you fall back on, and then product management feels really good. If you have those skills, you can be in a good spot. The job search process are skills. These are all skills we're talking about, ones that most of us have not had the opportunity to learn, to invest in, to take time to build. But when you do, just like your product management role, you can be incredibly successful. And I cannot emphasize enough, invest in building the skills because you will need them. And in a crazy market like this, where there is more turmoil, these skills are so much more valuable. And not just for this job search, but every other one. The average duration for a tech role is 18 to 24 months. So any time or money that you invest in learning these skills now will pay off massive dividends over the course of your career. So I would just say, whether you're looking for a job or not, invest in the skills of how to look for a job because it's different than doing the job.
With that, thank you so much, first of all, BJ, for appearing on the podcast. Great first appearance. I think first of many. You shared really awesome insights and tips. So thank you. And then for everyone watching, make sure if you're watching on YouTube, hit like and subscribe. If you're on one of the podcast platforms and you're listening, just please do leave us a review. I love to see those comments. I love to hear about what you want to hear more. And make sure you check out our programs on intentionalproductmanager.com. Thank you. Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.